This is the account of those lesser-known weapons, those that changed pace and rule, that allowed the urban militia to match cavalry, or that introduced gunpowder before the world noticed, or that simply adapted what they had at hand to deliver victory. In every move, in every whip or explosion, everything reveals a different face of feudal warfare, the ingenuity operating at the interface between the medieval order and the transition to the modern. The fatal staff, the Godendag, and the artisans' uprising. In the cities of Flanders, arming a militia didn't mean filling chariots with knights. It meant taking what you had: heavy sticks, iron spikes, courage. Then came the Godendag, a sturdy stick measuring about 90 centimeters to 150 centimeters, made of solid wood with a metal hood and a short iron tip. Let us imagine craftsman, mason, weaver, without plate armor, without horse, facing a charge of aristocratic cavalry. The answer: line up the Godendags in the swamp, at the bend in the bank, create a barrier of spikes, and when the horse got stuck, the staff would duck, and the final blow would be delivered. On July 11, 1302, at the Battle of the Golden Spurs at Kortrijk, the Flemish militia used this type of weapon to defeat the French cavalry. More than 1,000 horsemen were slaughtered by men with these improvised weapons. What makes the Godendag so fascinating? It is not a weapon of nobility, it is a weapon of those who have little and do a lot. It's not ornament, it's pragmatism, and it demonstrates the turnaround. The traditional fiefdom begins to realize that the heavy horse and the long spear no longer represent absolute invincibility. The invisible powder, the chemical weapon of defense, calcium oxide, quicklime. In the fences and naval battles of the late feudal period, something rarely seen in the reports emerges: containers of quicklime, dropped on people or vessels whose reaction with humidity could generate severe burns, blindness, panic. According to expert sources, jars filled with ground quicklime, thrown from above to enemy ships, the dust rises. It gets into the eyes of the enemies and irritates them so much that, almost blind, they cannot see. Imagine the scene. At night, an enemy boat approaches, men prepared on deck, and suddenly a vessel shatters. White powder rises, eyes burn, visibility fades. The gun does not cut the body. It attacks perception, coordination, morale. In the fief, where cavalry and infantry seem to dominate, behold, the silent dust alters the balance. This unusual weapon had enormous variables: the mode of transport of the containers, the timing of the launch, the reaction to the wind, the clothing of those attacked. But what matters is that it reveals that the feudal system, despite its stables, walls, and towers, also operated with tricks, improvisations, resources beyond pure steel. The pre-machine gun and the shield that fires, the rebaldachin and the gun shield. As the 14th century progresses, gunpowder creeps in, experimental weapons proliferate, and feudal warfare enters a phase of mutation. Among these creations, the rebaldachin, also called the organ gun, stands out. Several barrels aligned like organ tubes that fired simultaneously, projecting a hail of projectiles. Information indicates that in 1339, Edward III's army used rebaldachins with 12 barrels in France. In addition, the gun shield appears, a shield equipped with a built-in fire barrel. An English example. In 1544, Henry VIII had about 100 units of this hybrid type of protection and firing manufactured. Why so unusual? Because they mix two worlds: the traditional shield plus sword defense and the primitive fire of gunpowder weapons. The rebaldachin foreshadows the machine gun by projecting multiple shots in a single action. The gun shield tries to unite protection and attack in a single instrument, but the result was often impractical: heavy, slow to reload, unwieldy. Still, they served as signs that feudal warfare was changing. Visualize the impact: a line of archers and spears, and suddenly a roaring roar, metal on metal, smoking barrels, and the cavalry sees the shots multiplying. A glimpse of the end of the night as absolute dominator. The tools of the field become weapons, the peasant adaptation. In a castle, everything shines: polished armor, razor-sharp swords, long spears. Outside the walls, however, the reality was different. Urban and peasant militias improvised what they had. Scythes transformed into polearms, adapted agricultural axes, even converted hoes. The war scythe is one such example. The inverted agricultural blade, mounted on a long handle, becoming lethal against less prepared cavalry or infantry. Sources list the war scythe among the polearms of the Middle Ages. Think of the peasant who plowed the land at dawn and, at the sound of the alarm, took his scythe, raised it, and attacked the mounted invader. The image breaks the narrative of feudal warfare as noble exclusivity. It reveals that, when pressured, ordinary men saw in everyday life the raw material of violence. These weapons were not glamorous, but they had purpose, and often effectiveness. The lesson: in the fiefdom, winning was not always a matter of shining sword, but of creativity, terrain, surprise. Beyond Europe, weapons of the feudal systems of other cultures, although much of the classical narrative focuses on Europe, feudal systems have been found on other continents, and with them, equally unusual weapons. For example, in feudal Japan, the kanabo appears, an iron or wooden club reinforced with metal nails, used by warriors who did not opt for the sword. The idea here is to expand the panorama. The feudal structure, lordship, vassalage, warriors, generates weapons that mix brutality and symbology. The kanabo enters more into the realm of raw force, of direct impact, without refinement of blade. Such weapons show that the unusual invention was not peculiar to Western fiefdoms, but part of a global matrix of conflict under similar power regimes. To the audience, this means it wasn't just Europe, it wasn't just the cavalry. It was the universal adaptation to war. What these weapons tell us about the feudal system? These unusual weapons are not loose curiosities. They are reflections of the social, economic, and technological dynamics of feudalism. Let's look at some axes: inequality and innovation. The fact that artisans needed Godendogs reveals that the European fiefdom had profound differences. Those who could not ride horses or afford armor needed alternative weapons. War as an engine of technology. The Ribaldequin and the gun shield are proof that by the end of the Middle Ages, gunpowder and technological experimentation were already eroding classical feudalism. Symbolic and moral power. The use of quicklime, or the transformation of sickles into traditional weapons, were gestures of inequality turned over, popular militias facing knights. This shook the imagination of the invincibility of the nobility. Terrain, surprise, and context. The effectiveness of many weapons depended on the location: swamps, rivers, peasant pole arms on enclosed ground. The urban militia knew that it would not win in the open field against conventional cavalry, so it created environment weapons. Extensive military culture. Seeing the kanabo in Japan, or the increasing use of gunpowder weapons in Europe, shows that feudalism was not an isolated phenomenon, but part of multiple civilizations that adapted warfare to their conditions. 6 extra examples for future exploration to further enrich the content: 6 lesser-known weapons. 1. Man-catcher. Pole arm for capturing knights, valuable for ransom or kidnappings. 2. Plumbata. Throwable javelin used belatedly, but shows how even light projectiles had a place in feudal warfare. 3. Potiphar, one of the first cannons in Europe, weak in power but symbolic in the feudal modern transition. 4. Welsh hook, polearm adapted from agricultural implement among Welsh soldiers. 5. Spetum, a polearm with a central blade and 2 side arms, for versatile grappling. 6. Bollock dagger, small dagger with a peculiar grip, less spectacle and more lethal intimacy. Each of these weapons contains within it micro-histories: who used them, in what context, how effectively, and why they have remained obscured in conventional accounts. When we review these weapons, the well-placed staff of a militiaman, the powder that blinds the adversary, the hail of barrels that anticipates modern weapons, the agricultural tool that turns tragedy to the cavalry, the weapon of another continent that operates under another fiefdom, we realize that the feudal system was more fluid and inventive than the image of gleaming castles suggests. War was not just honor and tournament, it was adaptation, improvisation, contingency. The unusual often became decisive, and on the feudal stage, between walls, horses, spears, and promises of vassalage, the strangest weapons told stories that almost no one tells, until now.